My name is Yemisi Akimbobola. I'm the founder of a platform called Stringers Africa, and I'm also a lecturer at Birmingham City University. We've got a very exciting panel here today who's going to talk to us about their shared experiences and advice on fake news and alternative facts, which are terms that have become more prominently used today as a result of President Trump and his administration, but largely fake news has been around for as long as journalism has been around. Okay, we're going to start today with Jessica Arrow, who's a Finnish journalist who herself became a target of Russian-sponsored trolls. She's going to share her experience and her findings on pro-Kremlin social media propaganda tools. And then we're going to follow that with Natalia Antelava, who's the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the platform, award-winning platform, Coda Story. And she's going to talk to us about how to not cover lies. And finally, we've got Alistair Reid, who's a social media journalist at the Press Association, who's going to share some best practices on communicating debunks and steps we can take towards rebuilding trust in journalism. All right? So after everybody has spoken, then we'll take questions from the audience. So without much further ado, we'd like to welcome Jessica Arrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So greetings from Finland. I will share my story, what happened to me, how my life totally changed after I started to investigate in 2014 the then new phenomenon of Russian information warfare. Basically, it went so that I started to investigate the trolls, and then trolls started to investigate me, and also now we are seeing a police investigation of international pro-Kremlin propagandists. But I'll show you in detail what happened and how I did my investigations and what I found out. So in 2014, September, I asked Finnish audience to share their information and experience on then new phenomenon, social media propaganda disseminating trolls who operate under anonymous profiles or fake identities on Facebook, Vkontakte, Twitter, and on different normal media's comment sections. I wanted Finnish people to tell me how do these trolls operate, what kind of disinformation are they spreading in Finnish information space, and most importantly, how do they impact, what kind of influence do they have on Finnish actual people, and thus the Finnish public debate and freedom of speech. I saw this then as a threat to freedom of speech, to free flow of information, and also national security. So I specifically asked audience not to name any individual trolls because I was investigating the phenomenon. And immediately I became target of fake news myself. In these fake news pieces spread on Russian language fake media, these were spread in high volume. Over 10 different fake news sites were spreading this disinformation about me. This was just a couple of days after my original article. In these articles, it's told as a fact that I am some kind of cooperator and contributor and helper and assistant of American and Baltic special services and security services. So this disinformation is framing me as some kind of foreign agent. Also, these texts are accusing me of different crimes, such as persecuting people by their opinion, and I'm also framed as some kind of agent who is actually creating racism and hatred towards Russians in Finland. So in Finland we have big Russian-speaking community, over 70,000 people, and obviously many Russian speakers around the Russian-speaking world, which is very big, had read these articles, and this is where it comes to the biggest problem of disinformation. Some people actually believe in it, and I started to receive threatening phone calls, threatening text messages, accusations in Russian language, or very clumsily translated email messages from Russian to English or Finnish, in which this original fake news was used as fuel to harass me and insult me and accuse me groundlessly of agitating hatred against Russians or being guilty of several crimes. Also, people from around Russian world, for example Kazakhstan, Ukraine, would hope for me to put in jail because of my activities they believed and saw as truth. And they had never seen my original article, which was in Finnish. And yeah, this is how fake news are being used to agitate and mobilize people into actions. In the best case, fake news only influence in people's ideas and attitudes, their thoughts, but in the most severe cases, they even are used to mobilize people, for example, in violence. In my case, mental violence. And yeah, of course, I forgot to mention in these fake news, my contact information was also published. Okay, so then there was immediately also an attack against me and my employer, the Finnish Broadcasting Company. There was a social media agitated complaints campaign in which trolls and actual people were sharing this formally very good looking and legally very persuading text, a complaint to Parliamentary Ombudsman in which Wiley and me are again accused of several crimes based on one crowdsourcing troll article we published. Also here is some then examples of what kind of citizen debate is created with help of propagandists and fake anonymous troll profiles. So here people are hoping for my death, which is in Finnish legislation seen as illegal threat, so criminal act. Also they are accusing me of bloodshed in Ukraine and disseminating hatred against Russians. Also in these troll groups, everything I said publicly in radio and TV about this topic, everything was torn apart sentence by sentence, and I was mocked, and trolls would organize like crowd operations in which they would gather as much information about me as they could, and also my colleagues. Here they had gathered 263 email addresses of my colleagues inside Wiley, to whom they then sent disinformation and lies about me. Here is some comic being made of my public appearance of video of another news report I was making. And again, quite trollish style, these kinds of comics were sent to me on Twitter. Also, I went to see the Russian troll factory in St. Petersburg, and we disclosed with my great colleague Mika Mäkäläinen many new details from there. You can see these reports from online. And soon after that, troll activists on Facebook organized protest against Wiley Troll Factory, accusing again and hinting Wiley workers being propaganda activists and propaganda spreaders and being guilty of several crimes, and actual people showed up to protest. Here is, in very short form, my findings. I then continued my investigations and I checked all the hints great Finnish people, members of the audience, were sending me, and I listed techniques and forums and impacts the trolls had had on Finnish freedom of speech and Finnish people's minds. And unfortunately I found out that trolls had already silenced Finnish people, scared, mixed up what is true and what is not true, for example in the situation reporting about Ukraine. And also some people had been turned into propagandists on social media. Here are some troll comments being spread on massive amounts. Here is just one example of who are participating in troll activist conversations. This is high-profile Finnish parliament official hanging out, spreading disinformation in a Facebook troll group. in the name of Finnish Parliament. Here is one campaign against me, song campaign. There was professionally produced song in which again I was framed as unstable, mentally ill person who made up trolls in my own head, which don't, actually exist, the Kremlin trolls. And I'm again framed as some kind of USA and NATO lobbyist. And they also seem to have filmed some smearing film inside YLE with an actual actress playing me. They put this on YouTube and spread it on Twitter, Facebook, and everywhere. Okay, so then troll activists also investigated some documents of a Finnish court, and they found that I received €300 fine for drug use when I was very young, so in 2004, because I had serious drug problem then, and they made it look like this. And also they published screen caps of court documents, my private health information, telling in which hospitals and when I had been for treatment for this drug problem. And now it's forever online for everyone to see. Here are some fake news headlines about me. This is just tip of the iceberg. And this is originally in Finnish language, but I translated it in English. So here is dynamics of fake news and hate speech. Every fake news almost produced about me produced also a wave of hate speech against me, where actual people, even my own former friends who know me personally, are sending me death threats. And then there are trolls who are accusing me of the same conspiracies as these fake news are. So actual people really believe in this. And this is like it is with Russian state media and Russian organized fake news sites. There's always a reaction when I publish an article in English or to the international audience. There's always counter-reaction trying to depict me as not credible as possible and as mentally ill and all kinds of stuff. So this is my story, and thank you, and goodbye.
Hi, I'm Natalia Antelava. I'm a journalist and co-founder of Coda Story. And I actually hate the term alternative facts, and I hate the term post-truth. Well, post-truth not so much, but alternative facts and fake news, because they're kind of a nicer packaging for lies. And they cover up slightly an enormous crisis that we all face as not just as journalists and in the industry, but as humanity as a whole, where the very concept of truth is under attack from so many sides. And whether it's Russia today, it's not happening just in Russia, and it's not coming just from Russia for sure, but when everything can be debated and everything, as Peter Pomerantsev said, nothing is true and everything is possible, we are in deep, deep trouble. What gave me a lot of hope from the last 3 days of the conversation is that the conversation seems to be turning, that we really need to treat this as a story. And it is a story, it's a huge story that's shaping our lives. At Koda, the media non-profit newsroom that I've co-founded, we were not set up to cover disinformation at all. We were set up to address what we believe is a shortage of continuity and commitment on part of bigger organizations to crises that are shaping our world. So we were really trying to create a platform that creates continuity, that stays on the story, that puts a team of journalists on one crisis at a time and then stays with it for an extended period of time. One of the main issues that we're covering now, we have 3, but the main one is the disinformation crisis, because we are treating it as that. We are treating it as a crisis, and what we are trying to look at are actual stories. And for me personally, I think Ukraine has always been an example of how damaging fake news and disinformation can be, how long-lasting its consequences, and how life-changing it can be for people. I think it also, to journalists, it also offers some invaluable lessons that we can be applying to our profession to covering disinformation as we try to figure out how to cover it. I think I can talk about it endlessly, but I think to make it shorter and more concise, I would sum it up as 3 lessons. I think the first lesson is that we need to be aware of this happening. We need to be aware of disinformation. And in Ukraine, it was definitely a problem. We all arrived. I covered the Ukraine war for the BBC mostly, but the Crimea annexation for the New Yorker. And I arrived in Crimea, and like every other journalist in Crimea, I was completely confused about how to go about covering this, because we had a situation where there was one thing happening, which was troops in unidentified uniforms taking over the island, and tiny protests that were the peninsula, and tiny protests that were going on. And at the same time, you know, we had the Kremlin saying, oh no, these are not Russians. So we knew that they were Russians, but Putin was saying, no, they're not Russians. So, and we are taught in the Western School of Journalism, right? What you do, you balance what one side says with what the other side says. So we balanced, you know, these are Russian soldiers. No, these are not Russian soldiers. Oh, suddenly they then became little green men. And very, and sort of unintentionally, I think, the Western media that covered the Crimea annexation kind of fed into the Kremlin disinformation, because just simply by calling Russian soldiers little green men and countering these are Russians by no, they're not Russians, that superficial balance kind of created enough room for people to doubt and not to know what was happening. Well, it was pretty clear what was happening by the 3rd or 4th day. I'll never forget how the war that felt from the very beginning as one of those hostile environment courses that BBC sends you on, where you run around the woods and there are actors hired who pretend to look like swig bag bottles of vodka and kind of shout at you and then kidnap you. And it's all kind of a little bit scary, but you also know it's a game and you'll get out of it. And that's what the war in Ukraine felt like. It was kind of this like weird characters hanging around and, you know, not all that much happening and a few protesters here and there. But there was another war happening from the very beginning on Russian television. And I remember walking around, you know, the city of Slavyansk and pretty calm, not much going on. And then coming back to my hotel and turning on Russian television and seeing pictures of a bombed out, shelled city and you know, crying orphans. And at the time, the Russian TV was using footage from the Balkan Wars and saying that it was happening now in Slavyansk. And it was incredible to watch how this war, which was played out on TV but wasn't real, suddenly seeped off these TV screens into reality. And suddenly, you know, we had 298 bodies in the field of sunflowers when the MH17 was shut down. And as I look back at it, I realize how we, the journalists, never managed to capture what was happening, that disconnect between that process of that war actually getting from TV screens into the real life, becoming real. We never told the story of disinformation. And it's a hard story to tell because if you tell it very superficially in a way that we are used to, because we're on massive deadlines and under a lot of pressure, then you end up doing the he said, she said reporting, which ultimately feeds fake narratives and disinformation. So I think the second lesson we need to learn from Ukraine is that we really need to spend longer on stories, to go deeper, to not just say, oh yeah, He's wearing some uniform. We don't know who it is. These people say he's Russian, but the Kremlin says he's not Russian. No, there was not a single report from Crimea that put a name and a face to that unidentified soldier in Crimea. You know, there was never a story of Sasha from Irkutsk who was deployed in Crimea. And we need to do more of that. We need to spend more time on digging up. There was a little more. If any of you have seen Selfie Soldiers by Simon Ostrovsky, the Vice News film, this is a great example of storytelling that, you know, captures the power of disinformation. And I think the third lesson is, and I'm gonna steal a line from Siddhartha Nash, who just spoke in Vienna at this conference. He said a great line. He said we need to figure out how to get good stories into echo chambers of populism. We have a massive problem. Fake news share better than real news. And there are many ways. There are a lot of people who are experimenting. I put it up. This is, as you guessed, the Coda website. We're among the people who are experimenting with kind of putting human face and kind of doing more engaging storytelling. I'll give you an example. So we, you know, I mean, you can explore it later for yourself. We do this series. For example, we do a series called Jailed for a Like, which traces cases of Russians who have been imprisoned for social media activity. Another one that's been very successful is Clash of Narratives, and it's we take two people from the opposite sides of an echo chamber and from two opposite narratives, and we follow them very closely. And again, if you do it in a 3-minute TV piece, it doesn't work. But if you do it over a period of time, when you really build, not just get the sound bites, but kind of build up the characters and turn it into kind of more engaging series, it becomes much more compelling. And what's interesting, I mean, we're doing now this different seasons in different countries, but we did our pilot in Georgia where we followed these two women, both very charismatic, both very, here there are 3 episodes, both very charismatic, both very politically active, both owners of TV stations, one very, very pro-Western, liberal, the other one very much leaning towards the Kremlin and the Kremlin's messages of kind of xenophobia and homophobia and so on. What it did is it attracted people from the two opposite sides of a narrative and made them watch it. And it kind of, you know, we hope it just exposed people to the alternative points of view. Because to me, I think this is the only way that frankly, I'm very skeptical about debunking news. I think fact-checking is important. Unfortunately, what we have learned over the past 2 years is that people don't really care about the facts. But they do still care about good stories, and that's the only way of getting them engaged, in my view. I mean, there are all sorts of people trying different things. But if we want to counter the phenomena that is threatening all of our lives and future, I think the journalists need to, I think we all need to try to get out of our echo chambers and see the other side. And I think the journalists definitely need to try harder to bring good stories to the other side. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone, thank you so much for having me here and inviting me onto this panel. I'm just going to set this up very quickly, but it should be there instantly. And luckily, it should follow on pretty much straight from what Natalia was just saying. So, first up is that we, exactly as Natalia was just saying, we have a real issue at the moment. This was from some research done at the University of Indiana when they looked at a whole load of different false news, fake news, misinformation stories, whatever you want to call it, and then looked at the fact checks that were done about them. And every single time, the lie was outperforming the truth. It was being shared further, it was being read more widely. And this perfectly illustrates the problem that we have at the moment, is that a really dry, boring debunk is never going to go as further. It's never going to be shared as much and be read as widely as a really salacious lie told in a very shareable way. So what we need to do first off, when we're doing this, is to recognize your woe response, your news sense, basically, because misinformation is designed to, just like clickbait, to trigger a strong emotional response. That's why it works. It's because it makes people angry, or it makes them scared, or it makes them laugh. That's why it works. That's the whole point. It triggers a strong emotional response. That's what works on social media, and that's why it travels so widely. So we need to recognize that in ourselves, and when we are on social media, when we're on whatever network we like, and when we're on the web, to try and identify the stories as they are appearing, and then think about that in terms of the debunk as well. Secondly, we can't let our biases and our political views, whatever they might be, affect our willingness to fact check something. If something fits with how we view the world, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And in fact, we are more biased to believe something if it fits in with how we understand the world to be. It's called confirmation bias. If something confirms our view of the world or how we would like the world to be, we are more biased to believe it. So if anything triggers our woe response, it gives us a strong emotional reaction, no matter where it falls in reference to our own beliefs and our own views. We always need to be skeptical about that. And the first thing is to, if it's a really boring, fake story that no one is talking about already, don't touch it. Just leave it alone. Why give more exposure to stories or hoaxes or lies that no one cares about already? And that's something which it's been, while everyone has fantastically been starting to talk about the issue of misinformation and disinformation, something that has happened occasionally is that someone will take a hoax that no one was talking about, no one cared about, and then publish it like saying, look at this is what we're talking about, and actually spread it further, give it more exposure than it already had. We want to be going for the kind of hoaxes and lies which are already being talked about, which are already spreading far and having an effect, and not just the piddling little ones, which is just someone set up a website and trying to make a bit of money. We want to go after the big stories, the dangerous ones that people are already talking about. And a good way to do that, this is going to be quite a practical session, is with a website called Buzzsumo, which allows you to put in a website or a particular URL and see what the most shared stories from that website are. So if you wanted to, this was from some training I did in the Czech Republic recently, and we were looking at a particular website, and we said, right, what are the most shared stories from that website in the last month? I don't know how anyone's Czech is here, but it's something about Nigel Farage and Trump was their top story with a video. And so you want to be looking at the most shared ones, the kind of stories and lies and hoaxes which are already getting a large audience. Those are the ones we need to go after. And not just share them again, not just repeat them back at people without altering them, without making any kind of changes. This was this tweet from Catherine Bracey saying, you realize when you retweet a picture to say that people should stop retweeting the picture, you're not actually helping. And it is the easier thing to do, but that is just spreading it and sharing it further. We need to make sure that the truth travels further than the lie itself. So one way that I'll come to in just a second of doing that is by actually destroying the image and not just sharing it again, like these two from excellent, fantastic fact-checking organizations. But unfortunately, the way that they were communicating the debunk on Twitter was with the fake. People can just download that picture and then share it again if they wanted to. And in fact, in this one on this side, the tweet says, an image showing a British refugees welcome sign hanging from a Madrid building is satire. The debunk is the last word in the tweet. The truth is the last thing in there. And that can be just scanned by someone, and it might help to actually spread the lie further. This is a fairly innocuous, not really that harmful hoax, but it's still important to have this best practice involved. So in doing that, we need to try and make the truth as shareable as the lie, and whether that is making it visual, whether that's making it very emotive, or making it humorous, or whatever it might be, to try and make it spread as quickly and as fast and as far as the lies themselves. When I had to go at this when I was at First Draft. Sorry, I should have said at the start. Before Press Association, which I joined about 3 months ago, I was managing editor at an organisation called First Draft, which covers all of this kind of stuff. And when I was there, we took on that same hoax, but put a big old sticker on the fake one saying fake, and a big old sticker on the real one saying real. And then it's very clear exactly what the message is. And when people might want to, if they want to download those pictures, the debunk will travel with it. You know, that is, I have basically vandalized the fake image to make sure that the message and the truth travels with it. And we're going to go through some of these tips here on the right, one by one. But in destroying the fake image, you make sure that the truth travels with it. Obviously, in some situations, just slapping a big fake on it isn't necessarily adding the context or the strength of message that might be necessary. These were in a couple of examples from big stories last year at the shooting at the mall in Munich, when people were sharing a video of a police exercise in the UK. It was in Manchester. And there was a video of just a police training exercise of what they would do in the incident of a shooting in a mall. People were sharing that video saying this is what's happening in Munich right now. And it was fairly easy to debunk, but in order to communicate that, we need to make sure that the truth is very visually clear, very strong message, and that the truth travels with the debunk. So we just whacked some text over the top of it saying UK police training, not Munich, and linked to the original, linked to the actual story where the video came from, which was on the Manchester Evening News when they wrote about the training exercise. When the attempted coup in Turkey was going on, there were all kinds of pictures going around which were claiming to be of the events there that just weren't. And it was it's very easy to debunk a lot of them with a reverse image search. But in order to communicate that, you can't just share that image again. Instead, we whacked, Korea 2015, not Turkey, Egypt 2011, not Turkey, on the top of the pictures to make sure that the message and the truth traveled with it. If it's the kind of story where it's appropriate, using humor is another very shareable and very emotive form of communication. So in this case, which was a fantastic fake, putting them side by side is very effective. So it's almost like it's almost like debunk judo. You're using the weight and the strength of the fake against itself to make it get shared and be shared more by putting the fake alongside the real video so that people can see the truth and understand it, but equally share it. Let's have it again, because it's great. I love that. So yeah, using where it's appropriate. Obviously, it's not always going to be appropriate to make jokes, but when it is, using that power of humor to make it shareable, and using the same kind of technical skills, digital technical skills, because it is an arms race. A lot of these hoaxes are becoming very sophisticated, and we have to match that in how we debunk them. If people are making incredibly shareable and funny and amusing videos, our words on an article alone aren't going to cut it. They're not going to be good enough. They're not going to be shared as widely as the very visual, amusing fake. So we have to try and meet the hoaxers and meet those hoaxes head on with a similar level of expertise. Or humor, as in this case, when, as you might be aware, in the US every year, pumpkin spice becomes a big thing in the autumn. And there was a massive hoax, a rumor going around that Durex were making a pumpkin spice condom. It wasn't true, but MTV, of all places, hardly the kind of bastion of high-quality journalism that you would think of, but MTV did an incredible debunk where they just said pumpkin spice condoms and 6 other flavors that aren't happening. That actually was spread further and wider than the original hoax. Because it was funny, it was disgusting, but it was also funny. And it's a very good example of making the truth more shareable than the lie in that case, and making sure that that message actually travels. There is a quick and easy way that was probably pioneered by the Atlantic after Hurricane Sandy, because there were so many fake pictures then, again, by just whacking the truth on top of it, and in fact putting a little bit of text underneath to show where people can go to to read more about it. This picture was at a war memorial when the message that was going around, you know, the soldiers are still there in Hurricane Sandy, they're still there at the war memorial, but it was an old photo. In another one, of course, this is quite a famous one, all the sharks that always come out when there are floods, it seems these days in America. There are floods in, there are sharks in the floodwaters. And if you can put the message over the top and be a bit creative with the messaging, then that will help it to be shared further as well. And some friends over at Medan, which is a kind of software non-profit, made this excellent tool, Memebuster. You can find it at memebuster.checkdesk.org, where you can just stick the sticker on the top with let's go down. You drop the image in, the fake image, whatever it might be. You can resize it if you need to. Put a bit of text in there to say, pass the message, and then put a link to where it is, and then add a sticker, whether that is fake or real or warning or a whole load of other options that they have in there to do this kind of thing really quickly and easily. The last thing in terms of the best practice I want to highlight is a bit more technical, but it's really important. And it came as the main example was after, you may remember around this time last year when Facebook got a lot of heat for their editors on their trending topics panel. Apparently, the claim was that they were suppressing conservative news. So they fired all the editors, and immediately a fake story went to the top of the trending topics bar, and that fake story was about Megyn Kelly at Fox News saying that she'd been fired. Now, because this was at the start of the whole conversation around misinformation and disinformation, a lot of people ended up writing about it, and you can see we've got The Verge, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, loads more. Like all the major news organizations are writing, Facebook fires all their editors for trending, and a fake story goes straight to the top. What ended up happening when they wrote about that and they linked to the fake story was that the fake story ended up coming near the top of the search results in Google. Because whenever we write a story and we link to a website, that counts as a vote of confidence for the search engine algorithms. And especially when a lot of big publishers, trusted websites, are writing and linking to the same thing, that is a lot of votes of confidence to in the way that the search engine understands the different websites. So it boosted the fake story up the list, up the search results. So how do we counter this? It's actually quite simple from a technical perspective, is that you use no-follow links. People hopefully will recognize a very simple like hyperlink tag in HTML, and normally we just do the href equals the link in the brackets, and then we have what it will appear like in the text. If you add, just very simply, after the link rel equals no follow, that means that link will not count as a vote of confidence when search engines scan through and try and figure out what how they want to list search results.
Even if people click on them?
Yeah. And it doesn't look any different on the front end anyway. So that's really important, and that's something which, as we can see over here, if everyone starts writing about fake stories, it actually boosts it in Google search results. So using no-follow links will help that not to happen. A very quick recap in terms of when we're doing this kind of debunking is to recognize our woe responses and our biases, and to make sure we are aware of them when we are surfing the web, and also when we're doing our debunking, so that it doesn't affect how we do it. And not to give unpopular fakes more exposure. Try and make the truth as shareable as the lie is a really important part, because otherwise it's almost a non-starter. Being clear and adding context and using humor where we can, and using no-follow links as well. I realize we haven't got much time left. I was going to do an extra bit on rebuilding trust, but maybe we can talk about that in the panel as well. Cool, thanks.